Hello, everyone, and thank you for your time today. This is the October 14th, 2020 Implementation Board meeting of the King County Regional Homeless Authority. Today's meeting will really be a time for us to hear some important updates and take action. First, we will hear from Hawkins Group on the progress of the CEO recruitment and specifics about the CEO interview process. We were originally going to offer or sort of see and be offered a slate of advisory board members and vote to accept that group and affirm their role in the regional governance. But that will have to be pushed to a future meeting due to delays in the COC board process to stand up this third and incredibly important part of our governance structure. This will likely be on the next agenda. So just wanted to highlight that agenda change for today. We will provide critical updates to you on initial staffing for the King County Regional Homeless Authority and get your vote on that staffing plan. We want to make sure that public comment is heard, so we'll have time on the agenda for that. And finally, we'll continue discussions about board roles, specifically taking action on selecting board chairs. So thanks again for being here. My name is Jason Johnson, and I have the great honor to serve as Director of the Human Services Department for the City of Seattle. Really good to be with you and help kick things off today and facilitate this meeting. Before we get started with roll call and introductions, I wanted to first acknowledge the Indigenous history of the lands we're so fortunate to be on today. I am joining you from Denver, Colorado. Town, and this is a region where we recognize Southern Ute and Ute Mountain tribes. The lands that Denver sits on originally belonged to the Arapaho people. Most of you, I assume, are joining today's meeting from the Coast Salish land, and we're so thankful to the Duwamish people who have long been and continue to be stewards of these lands. So thank you. Now, as we conduct roll call and check in with implementation board members. I think Jeannie or Sola, maybe even Carrie, one of you will call roll. And as each board member is called by name, if you could please, unmute, go on video when your name is called to acknowledge your attendance, we'd appreciate it. And also as a continued way for all of you to get to know one another better, please share if you consider yourself an introvert, an extrovert, or some combination. Personally, I am extroverted. I get a lot of energy from other people and find these days of isolation due to COVID to be extremely difficult. So let's go into roll call. And Jeannie, Sola, Carrie,
I'll go ahead and do that.
All right,
so this is Jeannie. I'm also an extrovert, just for the record. And yes, I am feeling isolated at home right now, although I do have my family surrounding me, but somehow that isn't always who I'm choosing to be with. I'm going to go ahead and call everybody's name just by order of your last names. And also just a reminder to panelists that when we're in group discussion, you can use the electronic hand raising feature that is part of Zoom. And so that we can make sure we get everybody who wants to say something. So first, Carrie Anderson. He is absent. Nate Caminos. Oops, I think you're muted, Nate.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Carrie. I appreciate it, Jeannie. Here, present, and I've self-identified as being an introvert, extrovert. Primarily introverted. In the past, many of my colleagues have been surprised when I share this, and when I know that I could go out in a cabin in the woods for a month alone and totally be okay. I've learned to turn it on, so to say, when I needed to in my career and personal life. I would often just tell people that just because I'm not talking doesn't mean I'm not actively listening. And as a fellow introverted friend of mine would just add, and secretly judging, not me, of course. To my fellow introverted colleagues, I recommend the work by Susan Cain. She wrote a book called Quiet, The Power of Introverts. It's been very helpful for me. And she also talks about the enigma of ambiverts, people who personalities has an equal balance of both introvert and extrovert features. So yeah, good afternoon to you all.
Thanks, Nate. Paula Carvalho.
Present. I am a strong extrovert, kind of like Nate. I think people peg me as an introvert in meetings because I don't like to talk if there's nothing to talk about. And I'm calling in from Hawaii, so good to be here.
Okay, I'm only a little bit jealous, Paula. John Chelmanack. I am going to get your name right before it's at some point here. John Chelmanack.
I always say it's close enough. I am here, and I kind of straddle that introvert, extrovert, definitely an introverted thinker, a little like Nate, can be judgmental. And you find a lot of people, if they do Myers-Briggs, who end up as INTJs, and they happen to end up in government. So, you know, Nate. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks, John. Helen Howell.
Hi, I'm here. I think I'm a combination. I have fallen in the extrovert column frequently, but I really do like my quiet time. And so I just kind of like to acknowledge that side as well. And like Nate, sometimes we do what we have to do in terms of turning it on.
Thanks, Helen. Gordon McHenry Jr.
Gordon McHenry Jr. is present and coming to you all from Southeast Seattle, almost to the county line. I've been evaluated as being an extrovert. I really like to watch people. I like to listen a lot. So perhaps I'm growing into finding energy in being introverted. And but today I will be appropriately extroverted with all of you. Thank you.
Okay, Harold Odom.
Hi, I'm Harold. Well, I'll let you guys. I would think I'm even worse. So if that is an outreach, you have to be.
So Harold, you're breaking up. Is that happening for others as well?
When I was working out,
Yes, breaking up very badly.
Yeah.
So Harold, we're not hearing what you're saying,
Okay,
just
well,
little snippets.
okay, I'm going to log out and log back in. How's that?
Okay, and we'll come back
I'm
to
gonna
you.
log out, log back in.
Okay,
Okay.
and then we'll keep moving on with roll call, and then Damien Patenaude.
Good afternoon, everyone. I one time heard in a song, a guy named Kendrick Lamar said, antisocial extrovert. So I think that kind of captured it for me on some level. Because of my role, I can go out and give a speech to a couple of thousand folks, but I would much prefer to sit at home and pay attention to my kids and watch the football game by myself and zone out.
Okay, Adrienne Quinn. Thanks, Damien.
Hi, Adrienne. I'm with Damien, and Damien, I'm going to have to plagiarize you at some point in time in the future. I hope you don't mind, but I share your sentiments. I've had to be extroverted for many of my jobs, but prefer to be an introvert and do the things that Damien mentioned. I'm calling in from Idaho on Nez Perce land.
Thanks, Adrienne. Michael Ramos.
Present. I'm an extrovert, and I have enjoyed the introverted opportunity from working remotely, being mostly doing everything from home, and having that reflective time. So maybe that has balanced me out. So thanks.
Thank you. Sarah Rankin. Oh, Sarah, we're not hearing you. It looks like you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. Sarah Rankin. I am of Damien and Adrian. Also, work requires me to be extroverted, but I prefer just to be around my people. And happy to be here today, and also learned a lot from you, Nate. I can't see where you reshifted to. Thank you for that insight about all of that information. I'm going to go and read some of the materials you suggested. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Simha Reddy.
Hi, I'm Simha Reddy, present, and consider myself generally introverted.
Juanita Spotted Elk. Don't think Juanita's here, so she is absent. Harold, are you back on? Looks like not yet. So with that, it looks like we have 11, assuming Harold is coming back. Right now we have 10 members present, and that does constitute a quorum.
All right, thank you. So I wonder, Jeannie, acknowledging that the public, we want to hear from them. And so I wonder if there's a way to quickly talk about how the public signs up to participate in public comment later in the meeting.
Yep, we have 10 minutes set aside later on today's agenda for public comment. And if you'd like to provide a verbal comment, please type your name and the city from which you're calling into the chat function. And then we'll use this to build a queue for the public comment period of the agenda. And right now that is scheduled for approximately 2:35 p.m.
Great, Jeannie, thank you.
And
right,
I just wanted
everyone.
to acknowledge also that I have promoted our presenter to panelist, Chris Woolware. So she's also with us now.
Great, thank you so much. So that's the first part of our agenda, is getting an update on the CEO recruitment process. So I'd love to introduce Christine and potentially Brett as well from the Hawkins Group. Thanks so much for being with us and providing an update on your important work.
Oh, thank you, Jason. Hello, everybody. I'm excited to say that for most of you, I've had a conversation, right? I think. So exciting. Good. Anyway, I know that we have just a few minutes, so Jason, I appreciate it. I think that there are sort of two basic documents that we were going to discuss. One, obviously, is sort of just to give you a sense. So what we've been doing is for the last actually almost 8 weeks, we have been sort of involved in stakeholder engagement. We've met with sort of many of you, with the governing board, with the evaluation committee, and we're working closely with the evaluation committee to develop and finally publish, meaning final publish, the position profile. And we've also developed screening criteria that we will use as we review potential resumes. We are slightly out of sync with the proposed timeline. We were scheduled to have concluded this exact phase by the 12th of October, and actually we won't conclude until the 15th. So it's just 3 days in terms of timeline. So we're not worried about it, but we do need to flag that for everyone's attention. So what we've done is we've developed, after all the stakeholder engagement meetings, we developed a draft of the public profile and shared that with every member of the evaluation committee and invited everybody to submit edits and to check with their respective constituencies, which I am pleased to say just about everybody has done. And we've now got tons of different edits, which we're merging as we speak. Great discussions. We've met sort of on an interim, we sort of did that around the 1st of October. We then met in an interim kind of way on the 8th of October to review some of the edits and to basically ask the evaluation team if they would consider dividing themselves into two groups. One group was principally responsible for managing the editing process of the public profile, and the other group is responsible for developing the screening criteria that the evaluation committee will use once we begin to screen candidates. So after some great discussion, we were able to find some agreement, and we divided ourselves into two groups. And so subsequently, we've met with the editing committee. And today we met with the screening review criteria review committee, and are now sort of moving toward the 15th, where we will finalize the position profile and effectively launch our search, and we will finalize the screening criteria. So we're feeling great about it. Of course, we've met a ton of really great people, and everyone has been just wonderful. Once we've gotten past what our job is, I'll say, and that have been incredibly responsive. And we look forward to the official launch, which should happen on sort of starting on the 15th. So that's our report. Thank you, Jason.
Great, Christine, thank you so much. Questions for Hawkins Group?
Yes. Should I open up the chat? Are they in the chat? Or people just asking? Okay, go.
You see
I've got a
Simha.
question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Simha.
I was wondering if you might just share some of the themes that came around as you talk to stakeholders and such. What are the major themes of what we should be looking for in a leader for the Regional Homelessness Authority?
Right. Thank you, Simha, for that question. It's great. And we try and describe it in the position profile in a more general sense. But basically, what we learned was, first of all, somebody who has experience basically starting and or launching and or assuming responsibility for an organization, but someone who has worked more so at scale than in a true startup environment. Do you know what I mean? So not someone who's managed 4, 5, 10 people, but somebody who's actually run an organization of like 50 to 100 people with a substantial budget. So that's the first sort of set of skills. The second is that someone who would be comfortable working in what is effectively a very complex political environment. Do you know what I mean? So somebody who's very comfortable recognizing that the political environment is really about finding ways to balance interest. And that there are, lots of interests that appear on the surface to be competing, but, if you spend the right amount of time, you can probably find your way toward a shared goal. So someone who has the kind of personal leadership style and insight to be able to manage that. And third, someone who has passion for the work, right? Someone who is interested. And these are in no order, so I don't want you to think that somehow. So you don't conclude that, but someone who understands, that the pathway to ending homelessness, begins where exactly and begins how, and that someone who's committed to centering people with lived experience, and that unique perspective in everything that's happening, right? But at the same time, recognizing that you're building a system, this is not that this organization is not going to be in the direct service providing business. They're going to build a system through a network of, sort of provider agencies, partnership relationships with, obviously, the county and the city of Seattle, but partnerships with the Lived Experience Coalition, partnerships with Sound Cities Association, the key stakeholders that are going to have some, sort of at some level of support and participation. So really recognizing that, sort of helping everyone to understand, the people, the lived experience and the need to sort of find the, to develop the pathway to end homelessness will begin. This person will be an advocate for that vision, but recognizing that realizing that vision is going to be the result of a set of coordinated and collaborative effort on behalf of a ton of different people, and organizations. So those are kind of like the main buckets, you know what I mean? And then there's the fourth one is a sort of a degree of financial fluency. So the finances are both complex and simple at the same time. Simple in the sense that the funding comes from, the city of Seattle and King County, and all that King County represents. Complex in the sense that the funding is sort of not going to be, one has to figure out how to leverage the funding to create the kind of provider network and system that is really going to respond to the needs. And so, if the funding is 120, 150 million or whatever the number is, everybody recognizes that that's not the total sum funding, but that there's going to need to be, relationships built, for instance, with, departments that provide behavioral health services, or departments that provide health services, or departments that provide housing, or departments that, so that there's a much bigger pie, but that this organization is going to be the center of the system that will create, access to services.
What other questions do folks have for Christine?
Yeah. Does that work for you, Simha? Did I get it?
It does. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. Anyone else? Oh, yes.
Adrian.
You might.
Christine, yeah, thank you. That was a great overview of the position. I'm curious if you could speak to a little bit, and perhaps this is premature, on how you all are going to do outreach to and recruitment for the position.
Right. Yeah. We don't exactly. It is a little bit premature, but not massively, Adrian, and thanks for the question. We've got our research team kind of fired up, you know what I mean, to begin to identify already a number of practitioners. One of the interesting pieces that for us is a little bit of a wild card is, how much of a genius this person needs to be with respect to homelessness in particular. Do you know what I mean? But definitely an advocate, a core advocate, and that kind of, sort of not trying to say anything less than that, but just literally, because that if we determine that, that we can look, for instance, outside the narrow, the homelessness community and look at adjacent, professional communities, that creates, some interesting opportunities in terms of people that we might consider. So so first and foremost, of course, we're going to look deeply in the homeless community in all sorts of ways. So, sort of looking at the way in which other cities sort of have, do this work and look at their leadership, and to sort of consider anybody in those capacities. We would look at major systems like the veteran system, which has a very interesting group of people who concern themselves with the homeless needs of the veteran community. There's at the federal level, the Interagency Homeless Council that combines sort of veterans, the Veteran Administration, HUD, HHS. There's 19 agencies that are all part of it, and so there is interestingly enough a network, therefore, of people who are managing, sort of the services, and who are at the same time running sort of organizations that are at the right scale. We are sort of at the same time looking toward people who are advocates in this community, people who are thought leaders in this community, people who may in fact be in communication with or working with other community-based organizations or cities or states who are looking at creative ways to sort of respond to the needs of people, sort of in this current circumstance. So that's kind of like, those are like some of the pathways that we're thinking about. They get refined once you launch, do you know what I mean? And you start talking to people and they're like, oh, you know, you should talk to so-and-so. So, you know, we're kind of narrow, in some ways, you know, laser focused in terms of what we're looking for, but we're flexible enough so that we can, you know, make sure that we are able to sort of meet and consider people that may have the core skill set, may have the heart that we're looking for. Do you know what I mean? May have the depth of experience in some areas, but not others. So we're not going to be so rigid, you know, that we're sort of going to miss anybody that's amazing. We also invite all of you, and I know we had this conversation with most of you, that if there are people that you think we ought to seriously consider, please forward them to us. Yeah. Thanks, Adrian.
Great, thank you, Christine. Any other questions before we shift to our next agenda topic?
Wow.
All right,
everything?
Great, Christine, thank you so much for your work. Thanks for your partnership, and really excited to know that the CEO recruitment is going to be launched very soon.
I know, this Thursday. Yay, or Friday, whatever, the 15th, whatever the 15th is. Thanks,
Tomorrow.
everybody.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Bye, Christine.
Bye.
All right. Before we shift and continue on in our agenda, I see that Harold has been able to join us again. So Harold, I just wanted to check in and one, just acknowledge that you've been able to join us, but two, see if you wanted to check in about whether you're an introvert, extrovert, or some combination thereof.
First of all, can you hear me or am I breaking up still?
No, we can hear you much better.
Oh, great. I think, and I've asked a few people just in the last few minutes which one I am, and pretty much everybody says I'm even keel. There's times where, you know, you have to like bring it on. Like a couple of people were saying that, but most of the time, I just even keel. You know? With some judgmental pockets, you know, around the area at times. So.
Great, thank you, Harold.
Besides that, I'm doing. Yeah.
Glad
and I
you
did
could
want to say,
connect.
and I just want to mention that this month is Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Month. So those of you who are in the service industry, bring that to the forefront all the time.
Thank you, Harold. Okay, I believe our next agenda item is an initial staffing update. And Leo, I think I'm turning things over to you to provide that update.
Hi, thanks, Jason. And Leo Floor, and I test as an E or an I depending on the test. So I'm not totally sure what that says about me other than that I test poorly, but maybe not too far to either extreme. Really quickly, before we get into the initial staff update, there is an item on the agenda. We were originally going to have before you as the board today the ability to review nominations for the advisory committee. And just as a quick reminder, the advisory committee you can think of as the third level of governance within the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. And it is actually, it's the Continuum of Care Board, which can essentially offer itself for your review to become the advisory committee to KCRHA. So that group of people would actually be performing two sets of functions within the same group of people at that point. We do not have that prepared for this meeting. And just so everyone knows what's going on, at the last Continuum of Care Board meeting, where Jason and I are actually both board members, we identified that in the slate of folks, we had at least a potential inconsistency with the charter of the COC. And so just to make sure that we're getting a group of folks ready to go and confirmed that comports with the requirements of the charter, the staff team has taken one more look at that. They're going to verify whether or not we had any issues, and then if so, either offer the same board or reconfigure their recommendation. So that's the reason for the delay. It's not as to any particular person. It's just ensuring it's charter, following the charter. And the specific issue is the COC charter has a limitation on the number of people who are direct homelessness services providers. And so the check right now is how many folks who identified themselves as providers meet that much more specific definition of direct homelessness service providers. And if there are more than 6, then we would have to either amend the charter or we would have to amend the group of people. So any questions on that before I move on to the staff update? Excellent. So we do anticipate that that will be in front of you at the next time you meet to consider in a regular meeting. The next item is a staffing update for the Regional Homelessness Authority. And so there is a document that accompanies this item. It's called the Interim Staffing Plan Decision Memo. And the purpose of this item is to seek your action as a board to approve or not approve the contents of this memorandum. For context, the governing committee has already considered this information, this memorandum in its current form, and they approved it when they considered it. And the purpose is to gain the approval of the governing committee and the implementation board for the KCRHA CEO when they are hired to be able to do some initial expenditures. The overall context is that upon within 60 days of their hire, the CEO is going to have to submit what's called a 60-day staffing plan. This is required within the ILA, and it's really the entire organizational structure of King County Regional Homelessness Authority. And if they submit it within 60 days, and then it takes 2 months to get through both boards and then enacted, what we really saw is that you'd get about a 5-month gap between when the CEO starts and when they could hire their first employee. And we assumed that we would not want the CEO alone and unafraid for almost half of a year trying to develop all that. And so this interim staffing plan is essentially seeking immediate authority to make a small number of hires and expend a small amount of money on some initial administrative functions so that they could build a core team and then begin to produce things like the 60-day staffing plan and do other organizational stand-up. So I won't read through the memo, but I'll pause here. Happy to answer any questions or for the board to discuss the item and then seek a vote once you have discussed it as you would like to. So any questions or discussion amongst yourselves as to the contents? Simha, please.
So I noticed the positions, those first 5 positions, the job titles are already created. Deputy Director, Program Delivery and Performance, Deputy Director Operations, etc. All of these make sense. I'm just wondering if the person we hire wishes to use those first 5 positions differently, like a different set of positions, or if they want to change the staffing model at the end of the 2 months, is that possible?
It is possible. The list of position titles is illustrative examples of types of positions, but is not. It does not limit the CEO in types of positions.
Great, thanks.
John, please.
Hey, Leo.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. Was it me or no?
Let's go with Harold and then John, please.
Thank you. So I'd asked before, with this group of money, are we going to have a equity-based and hiring team that the CEO can pick? But to start off with a good structure, have a hiring team that is equity-based and based on the theory of change. That is one of my big epic moments of going to bring to this board all the time. Are we making equitable decisions, and are we using the theory of change in those decision-making processes? And I don't see that here. And also, the Ombudsman Office, could that be a hint for the CEO to maybe look at hiring that person as well? I don't want to tell the CEO who to hire, but maybe a hint that the Ombudsman Office is an important office to have right away up front and reporting to he or she.
Thank you, Harold. I think by the terms of the memo, it's silent as to criteria or process or who would do hirings, and by what rationale they would do hiring. The memo, as it is before you, just authorizes that the person can spend the money, and does not include any further guidance. I think the board is certainly in a position to offer that guidance to the CEO, as the CEO will be reporting directly to you. And then to your point, Harold, I think the ombuds is a perfect example of the type of person that the CEO could choose to bring on. It certainly is allowable under this, and it is not, certainly is not precluded by this. John, please. Did that answer your question, Harold? John, please.
Okay, I had several questions here. One is just in terms of estimated salaries, and I assume, are these salaries and benefits or just salaries? And then where did you derive the amounts from? I'm curious.
Yeah, absolutely. I might, if Jason's still around, I'll invite Jason here in a moment, because a lot of this came out of some Seattle analysis, and it gets to a more fundamental question of where is this money coming from? And so the funding from both of these is actually money that the city of Seattle has already appropriated for this specific purpose of startup. And then the remainder is actually available through the Continuum of Care Planning Grant, our planning funds that are typically allocated to all home, but since we're transitioning, we'd be able to put some of that into here. I think Jason might be able to provide some more clarity on the source of the numbers.
Okay, and then do we have a concept of how many employees this agency will have? Has that been something that Seattle and King County staff have looked at?
Yeah, I think we certainly have. I have two ways to answer the question. So one way to answer the question is there was a consultant firm that did some initial analysis, and they were taking a look at, if you didn't sort of base off what we currently have and you designed a system from the ground up. And they developed three scenarios, and there was a scenario that has about the same number of employees as are in the current system. And I'm going to be approximate here, but we get to approximately 60 folks. And then they had increasing numbers of employees from there. That's not a model that the board and the CEO will be bound to, either positively or negatively. I think it was an analysis of what could be. And it had a lot of community feedback in it. The other way to answer the question is, what exists now? And again, there are about 60 employees between the two organizations, or at least FTEs. We are certainly experiencing shifts within the teams right now. The theory, I think, as we move forward, has been certainly one is that there are folks who do the same role both at the city of Seattle and King County. One thing that I do, and I think many who have looked at this caution against is at KCRHA, what we might find is you might be able to consolidate two of those positions into one position, but there's so much that's not being done in the current system that you would sort of use that extra person for. Those are, I think, squarely questions for the CEO. So I think 60 is, a good sort of very general planning factor. But there's a lot of decision there of what the CEO would do, and I don't want to presuppose that for that person.
Well, that answers one question of mine also, which was, do we need a human resources director? And if we're talking about 60 people or thereabouts, we definitely do. I was wondering if that could be outsourced, but that does help. That's good for me. Thank you.
So I am not expert in all Robert's rules, but I believe, Adrian.
Sorry, Leo, and I'm not sure if the hand raise function's working. It looks like it's raised in the participant list, but I don't see the hands going up on the screen. I just had a process question. I wanted to circle back to Harold's comment. And, I think we're all aware that we want to center people who are experiencing homelessness with the entire organization and structure. And so I agree with Harold that the ombudsperson should be one of the first hires. And I also recognize that it should be a decision made by the new executive director. So considering that, I am wondering, since we are a board that's advisory to the executive director, if it may be possible for us to have a resolution or something like that, suggesting that the implementation board thinks that that should be one of the first positions hired for. So it's a process question first, and then a question for my colleagues on the implementation board.
I will answer only the process part of that, which I believe you are absolutely empowered and able to put forward a resolution and vote on it to for direction like that. Other questions on the initial staffing memorandum that's before you? All right. Again, I think there are people more expert than me in Robert's rules here, but I think the thing to seek here is whether there is a motion from
Leo?
a member. Yes.
Just a question. I thought that Jason was going to speak to how he arrived at the salaries in the list.
Oh.
Yeah, happy to speak to that. So the initial salaries, sorry, backing up. The initial amount of money that the Seattle put forward for startup was to stand up some key systems and structures, which you all already voted on, which were just to make sure that there was a infrastructure in place for the regional authority to be able to manage its finance and treasury and be able to support a means of payment and benefit support for the CEO as the first employee. The second part of what we made available was an acknowledgement that the CEO first needed a budget to be able to pay their salary, but also and likely immediately would need to bring on some key staff. And, you know, not Leo and I's, it's not our job to determine who those staff are. It's the CEO's job to do that. But we wanted to make sure there was a budget to be able to do that. And so what we did in developing that budget and set aside and being able to set aside that that city resource to pay for startup was to look at similar positions inside of the public sector. So we looked at similar positions like a deputy director, like a finance director, such as an HR director, and then built a budget on that, a budget that is both salary and benefits. So that's where the number comes from, is really just doing some analysis in the public sector space of aligned positions, those positions for the most part being city positions or county positions.
So these numbers include benefits?
Sorry, yep, that is true. So the number is and typically inside of the city, and I believe it's the same at the county, when we develop budget around an FTE, we package salary with benefits. So that's what we've done here.
And Helen, to the extent that the question is about the amount, these are prorated amounts, not for a full year, not full year amounts.
Could you tell us what period of time then, so we could have some sense of what we're really talking about?
I can jump in and then Jason can correct me. So a lot of this is tied very much to a timeline that we are not currently on. This is when we believe we might have a CEO last month. And so it was a sort of largest case scenario, how much money should be available to the CEO for this purpose. We are clearly on a different timeline at this point. And what we are contemplating at this point is there may be a period after which the county and the city's 21 budgets have been enacted, but we have not yet put into place the master service agreements that will allow us to contract that money to them. So this would be the ability to carry forward from 2020 into 2021 funding that can sort of bridge that gap for the organization until we're able to contract to the organization the amount of money that it will need from us.
Understood. I'm just trying to actually get a sense. So is that 4 months? Is it 6 months? Like, what is the amount of time that these numbers are, you know what I mean, targeted toward? So we
the original timeline had an assumption of the CEO on board by September 1st. And so the budget assumptions that we were making were that the CEO salary and key first hires would be hired in that time range.
5 months then.
Mm.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? And if not, I think a motion could be in order to approve the memorandum.
So this is John. I will move to approve the staffing plan as stated in the memorandum, and to trying to think of the right word here, and to include the recommendation from the implementation board that the new that the new executive director and these staff move forward to hire the ombuds.
I would second that motion.
Any discussion? If there is no discussion, we've got the motion with an amendment, including a recommendation to prioritize hire of the ombuds. And I believe Jeannie is going to be kind enough to call the roll.
Yep. So I'm going to call the roll again in alphabetical order. And if you can just indicate yay, nay, or abstention. So Carrie Anderson, I believe, is absent. Nate Kamenos. Oh, Nate, I didn't hear that. If you can just unmute. I'm still not hearing it. Are other people?
No. Sorry, I have 2 mute buttons here. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Paula Carvalho.
Yay.
John Chelmanak.
Aye.
Helen Howell.
Aye.
Gordon McHenry Jr.
Aye.
Harold Odom.
Aye.
Damian Patnod.
Aye.
Adrian Quinn.
Yes.
Michael Ramos.
Aye.
Sarah Rankin.
Yes.
Simha Reddy.
Aye.
And Juanita Spotted Elk, I believe, is also absent. So that gives us 11 ayes, no nays, no abstentions, and 2 absences.
Wonderful. So I think there's some scripted thing about by your action you have just, but I won't go there. We've got approval to move forward. And I believe the next item on our agenda is public comment.
Yeah, so we are going to take public comment now. We have about 10 minutes to do this. And if you wish to make a public comment and have not already done so, type your name and the city that you're participating from in the chat window. And if you can do that now, and I do know that we have Bill Curlin Hackett on the list currently. So Bill, you have 2 minutes for your comment.
Give me 2 seconds to go ahead and unmute Bill. Okay, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Hope you're doing well. At the last meeting, I brought up that some of the regional committees are feeling very disconnected, and as one would expect as you're rolling out and your schedule keeps changing. But I know at the end of the meeting, Sarah made a motion or a comment, I don't know what it was, about bringing that onto this agenda so that you would talk about who can be informing, like East Side, South King, Lake City, other areas where there's monthly meetings occurring every month of people doing homelessness advocacy, outreach, and direct service. So I know you are going to have to walk and chew gum at the same time. So is there any possibility that you can begin to look at that as an option? Because I know a lot of people have no idea what you're doing. They don't even know how to sign on and find you when you meet. Now that's their doing, because I have realized we're able to do that now. It's a little better website than it was at first. But you know, we've got multiple governance going on right now, and I do think it needs to stay in the public sector's view. I don't know whether you count yourselves as actually having started formally, but I do think you've started formally, and we still have homeless people every day. And we're going to need your attention on that. So thanks. I hope you do get around to finding a way to reach out.
Thank you very much.
And I do not see anybody else who signed up to make public comment. So last call for that.
Jeannie, is it okay if we ask questions of our public commenters?
Now we've reached the limits of my Robert's Rules knowledge, so I don't know that. If anybody else does, you should chime in now.
I think that is perfectly appropriate for you as the board to be able to invite folks to answer your questions or to ask them questions.
Hope folks don't mind, but Bill, thanks for bringing that up. I know I agree. We had mentioned talking about this at this meeting. Could you just share with us briefly the types of questions that you're getting from the people you're working with, and if you have a proposed solution or best practice in terms of connecting with the various communities regionally? Would love to hear it as we enter into a discussion.
Sure. Thanks for asking, Simha. Well, I think Leo and Jason know this. You know, the system continues to move on as it's been funded in the past, and there's people out there getting that funding and doing the work. COVID has introduced a whole new fly in the ointment for everybody, and we have outreach meetings that are being directed by King County and by Public Health, and you know, more Zoom meetings on how to do the work that we're already doing. But one of the things that I think people are hoping for is, and I'd say this is not as much a functional issue as much as an issue of wanting to be part of the systemic response. They want to know that they're still part of this. All Home did, you know, a middling job occasionally. It used to get people out there to the counties, to the regional meetings, and they would present what All Home was doing and take questions back. Right now that doesn't exist. We don't have anybody bringing questions to you except in public comment or taking messages back. The Bellevue meeting, East Side meeting, for example, they said, well, we don't want to put you on the spot, Bill, and I know there's probably a few others in the audience from the East Side. Bellevue's human services manager is usually on these calls. But they don't really want to put us in the role of bringing back to those group meetings what it is you're doing and when it may all begin to connect like a train. You know, it's a lot of cars going down the track, but not very connected right now. And when we have something that's unique, we don't have anybody to go to anymore. We could bring it to All Home before, and people like Leo and Jason and others would come up with a funding remedy or a protocol or policy remedy or something that they could do. But right now we're looking at COVID, we're looking at winter shelter, which is going to be needed very soon. We're looking at the half of the unsheltered being in vehicles and really very little occurring in the way of addressing that. So I think out in the field, people really need that sense of connection to you. And I also say this regarding the governing board and even still All Home. And as being funded through the county or the city or the regional sites, there's really expressing this sense of just isolation. And that's a factor we see that affects the homeless too, isolation. So it's tough. I understand how tough this is for you. But at the same time, I've sat through all these meetings so far and it's all, and I know you have to put something together. But I wouldn't lift these meetings up for people who are listening in, even from the Seattle Times Homeless Project, and saying, oh, look what they're doing on homelessness. No, you're putting a system together. And I know you need to do that. And we all knew it was going to be tough. You know, I sat through all those meetings as well when Mark Dones and everybody else was helping with the theory of change. But we have to be held together. I guess that's what I'm saying. And right now I'm not sensing the meetings I go to feel like they're held as part of this. And they're still doing work. I mean, you know, every meeting is full of more things than they can fit into the timetable. But it's, you know, I don't want to say this is spiritual, but there is a part of it that feels that way.
Thanks so much.
I think I saw John. Did you have your hand up?
I did. I did want to say that the East Side, let me see if the East Side group has contacted me, and, you know, right now we are in just this sort of startup mode, but I just asked them to wait until we got through this meeting so that I could have something more to report, and I will set that up. I do think that who speaks for the implementation board may be something we want to talk about when we get into, you know, are we going to have operational rules and those sorts of things? You know, so maybe when we have chairs, it would be better to have the chairs be the chief people who talk to other groups about the issues, or we can do it where all of us are welcome to do that. But you know, that might be something that we come up with. And I will give you a very quick hack that I learned yesterday. Spacebar in Zoom turns on and off your mute.
And Harold, did you also have your hand up?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chominak. And Bill, I've known you, Mr. Hackett, I've known you for like 5 years. You paid my tabs one time, and all I have to do is volunteer work. And I've known you off and on over the years. We've kept in contact. Last year I was doing learning circles, and you were part of some of them as far as outreach. Would something like that, with more providers coming in and letting someone from the implementation board speak to you on that way? And that's in a month or so, not right now, but once we get more solidly together.
Well, I think there's a lot of ways to do it. Leo and Jason did a few weeks back. I'm not sure how long ago was it? 3 weeks, sort of an update for a lot of providers, which was helpful because some of them are, you know, mucky-muck providers. They're important providers. They're doing a lot of work, and they needed to hear some of this because they may not have time to sit in the audience like I do. So I think there's a lot of ways to do it. It's up to you folks. John, I really appreciate you reaching out. I know they said they were going to be in touch, and I think they've also been in touch with Carrie, who's the staff. Is she staff to just the governing board? I'm not clear anymore. But in any case, I'm just relating this because it came up last month and I didn't see it on the agenda, and I don't want to lose it. I want everybody to have trust in you and be able to come to you with permutations of things change. That all of you know that nothing stays the same in the homeless response system. So I don't have a lot more to contribute except, you know, I'm willing to be part of any conversation or not. But I do think that we need to keep everybody as informed and, let me say, excited. You know, let's get them extroverted about this. How's that?
Thank you. And then we are still technically within the public comment period, and we do have one more substantive issue to get to, which is chairs. I did see Michael's hand up, and so wanted to afford you the opportunity, Michael.
Thanks, and thanks, Bill. You know, I think there is a basic issue of accountability. We are accountable to the public. And it may be to facilitate that, the ability, and it may be on the chairs, but it could be on the staff, to have something of a one-page report or, you know, 1 to 2 pages summarizing the work and what is to come and why we're going about things a certain way, you know, prepared each month, that then in our different ways, we're tasked to get to different community groups or our constituencies, so to speak, or whoever asks, so that in other words, that we're positioned to go out in a way that is, you know, doable, but that it doesn't, the communication doesn't get left hanging for months, where people don't know what is going on and trust dissipates fairly quickly when there's a vacuum of not knowing what is happening, and needs on the streets are increasing. So appreciate Bill's point, and to facilitate that, we could create some tools, and then to clarify and encourage our board members what we should do, and provide us with some basic information to share out there. So just a thought.
Thank you, Michael. And we are in public comment. I see hands from Harold and Gordon. We also received a written public comment, so I can just read that to everyone. And that public comment was from, the name is Jean Darcy. And don't you have to know who these groups are and what they are doing in order to connect with them? And I believe that came up about 5 minutes ago. So I believe it was a discussion around when we were talking about the groups that are out in the community. We are about 30 minutes out from end. We do have one more substantive issue, which has to do with a consideration of structure and chairs. And then I saw Harold and Gordon's hands up.
Gordon, I haven't heard you ask a question yet, so I'll follow you.
Thank you, Harold. I appreciate that. I'll be very quick. I appreciate Bill bringing this topic up, bringing it up twice. I think there's reflecting on past practice and reflecting on the fact we're in transition. We exist, but we're still in transition to create that new system. We don't yet have a CEO. We don't yet have our chairs. I think there's merit in I'm making a suggestion that we ask Leo and Jason and their teams to continue having those periodic briefings, and perhaps to Bill's underlying point, maybe they need to be monthly, and until such time as we have a board chair or co-chairs, that one of us who has a seat and responsibility as implementation board member, commit to attend one of those monthly invitations to providers and advocates, activists, to get a briefing on what's going on in terms of all things homeless prevention, homeless response. That's my suggestion. I'll stop there and yield back to Harold. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. So mine is almost the same, that one of us commit to being, it could be all of us, just commit to being a spokesperson with Leo and Jason in those meetings. We just rotate. It would give us some information from what the community providers are saying or asking, and where we might get some leads on where we should go in some future date.
All right, thank you. We did get one more written comment with the public comment period still open. So this is from Bill Curlin Hackett. Says, let me add that this is all groundwork for the regional action plan needing to occur. If there is not any other public comment, we can close the public comment period.
Yeah, I just want to add, we have reached the allotted time. So for anyone who did not have an opportunity to provide comment and would still like to, I'll leave the chat window open for the next 10 minutes, and I'll take that note as record. Thank you.
Excellent. So that brings us to the next item on the agenda, and we are a little bit short on time right now, but the question is the structure of chairs for this board. And I believe at the last meeting, or perhaps 2 meetings ago, you received initial information about potential structures and then who might occupy those chairs. And so this is a chance for the board to deliberate now on potential structures. And then I will add from a staff perspective, it's come up now, I think in 5 different comments of board members. It would be, I think, a good opportunity to be able to better align with the board to identify a chair or chairs so that we could begin to create agendas with you so that they can meet your expectations. With that, I don't know if there's any discussion on the agenda item here about structure and then who might fill those positions.
I noticed in the last I don't know if it was the last meeting or 2 meetings ago, a number of us at the close of the meeting, because we were running short on time, were entering some thoughts. And my takeaway from that, and I'd ask my colleagues to correct me if I'm wrong, but my takeaway from that sort of chat was that there seemed to be, at least among the people in the chat, some consensus developing that it would be advantageous to have at least co-chairs, so that the entire responsibility is not borne by one person.
Thank you, Sarah. And just to help give some shape to the conversation, you do have a memorandum that does lay out the sort of some of the permutations that are possible. So we've included the language from the interlocal agreement, and really you could adopt a structure that has one chair and one vice chair. You could adopt a structure with vice or co-chairs and one vice chair, and there's actually no limit to the number of co-chairs that you could have. You could have co-chairs and co-vice chairs, and so and neither of those limited by numbers. Or you could, and if you're looking at the memorandum, this is the purple shape, you could actually unify the functions of a vice chair and a chair in 2 co-chairs. So have them essentially be lateral to each other as opposed to vertical to each other. So those are the basic shapes that are available, and in any of those instances, there's actually no limit on the numbers of either that you could have. So what I heard Sarah say is a structure that contemplates co-chairs at least.
I also think I started to sense some consensus in prior conversations, and again, I could be wrong, but I'm just trying to facilitate us, given the limited time we have, that there was some consensus around the need to make sure that at least one of those positions is a person with lived experience.
If I could, Gordon, just jumping right in. Adrian's got thumbs up, and I was one of the ones that did post that in the chat box that I thought I would I'm going to vote. I'm going to suggest we consider co-chairs, and at least one of those co-chairs be a person who we understand and who they affirm has lived experience with homelessness. And I think Helen, right after I did that, said that she concurred with that approach.
John, please.
In the spirit of Gordon being extroverted, appropriately extroverted.
Harold and I always want to talk at the same time. Harold, go ahead. Did you?
No, I'm just listening. I think staff is hinting our way to go to co-chairs because everything is blue and red except for the co-chairs, which is purple. Kind of a royal color to move forward. That's all I say.
So I just, what I wanted to say is that I do remember some discussion about, at least in the interim here, that the chair will have to sign off on expenditures and that sort of thing. So one of the reasons that I am great with the co-chairs, I'd like to also have a position of vice chair, because if a co-chair is not available at some particular time, the vice chair would have the power to be able to sit in and sign off on that. And I just don't want, kind of the whole COVID thing getting in the way. So I kind of like the co-chair. I guess I didn't print out in color. I like having a vice chair, and we probably need to have a secretary officially appointed, but I'm good with either.
Nate, please.
Yeah, it's been a while since we first initially talked about this. I think it was back in August now that we're already in October. And one of the things that I mentioned, just to reiterate for the group, is that some values or things that I was thinking about before the creation of this memo was that we do have 2 co-chairs and one person have lived experience, that we be mindful about the diversity, the makeup of this executive group, however that may come about in the 4 options that we have before us, but also be geographically diverse as well in terms of the difference of what the Rainier Valley is, different than the Snoqualmie Valley, different than the Kent Valley, and understanding the whole entirety of our county. I do think, and maybe it was one of the previous memo that was proposed or shared with us earlier this summer, to John's point too, I think it is important to have a secretary, in addition to the wonderful materials that we are able to get a week in advance of these meetings, as an example of what was just shown here in public comments, just being able to have meeting minutes and notes to reflect upon what was discussed, since it has been several weeks since we last met. Getting into the transition of what we're about to dive into today and the next meeting and therefore and moving thereafter is just going to be a helpful process amongst other documentations that a secretary would be helpful with, in addition to the fact that we don't have a CEO, the executive director, and a large staff dedicated to commit in doing the work that we'll have to take on for ourselves here and to help pitch in. I also think it is important that we have a treasurer. As was discussed in a previous meeting, I know that there's some of the colleagues on the board that expressed wanting to have a hope that that person who would take on that treasurer role have experience in being a treasurer, at least managing large complicated budgets like this, and being an advisor for us. And I think that would also just help kind of address the same concerns or things that John mentioned as well, of is having this kind of collaborative executive board, members of our board, to be able to fill in when needed, whether it's for processes and operational aspects, or even as an example, just our cohort of these 3-4 individuals at minimum, in addition to the board as a whole, if there are speaking engagements and opportunities to connect with the communities countywide and regionally.
Thank you, Nate. And then I think we see Helen and then Michael, and just a note in your memorandum, it does say that should the board create the offices of a treasurer and or secretary, it's possible to populate those either from members of the board, or actually they could be employees of the authority, although not employees of either King County or Seattle. Helen, please.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to speak a little to the distinctions between board responsibilities and staff responsibilities. Ultimately, this is going to be an entity with full staffing, and normally there would be someone, it's not literally the secretary of the board who's literally writing up the notes. It's usually someone on staff who writes them up, and that person reviews them before they go back to the board for approval of the minutes. And so I just want to make sure that we keep in mind that eventually it's going to be a much larger, certainly not huge, but larger enterprise, and these various roles and what's most appropriate for staff versus board members. And I say that with regard to the updating of various community meetings as well. I think that it would be a lot to put on the board co-chairs to be expected to go to the number of community meetings and group meetings and provider meetings that occur. That would be a lot, and that's one of the things that I think staff would be responsible for, some of the communications with those groups. I did like the idea of some sort of a summary, which we're getting at with the secretary suggestion, so that it's documented somewhere, and it could be on the website, right? Public record. Here's what was discussed. Here are the resolutions that passed, that sort of thing. But I just encourage us, as we're thinking about the board, to also think longer term when there will be staff to support the board as well, and what is most appropriate where. That's all.
Thank you, Helen. And then I think we've got Michael and Damien, and two things. One, I misspoke. The ILA actually does allow an employee of Seattle or King County, since they're parties of the ILA, to fill those treasurer or secretary roles. And then the board need not assign all officers at once. So you could take action on co-chairs today and then make subsequent decisions around treasurers or other officers. Michael and then Damien.
As part of my question too, I'm fine with the concept of co-chairs and the distribution of talents among the co-chairs. So I did have a question of the impact on the decision on the selection of a treasurer. So it sounds like it doesn't preclude that. And I think more discussion is needed about what the role of the treasurer entails. What are the powers granted? What are the powers, if it's not a board member, what powers do we cede by that? And And so it would be good, even if we select co-chairs today, which is fine, that we aim to figure out what the whole of the officer structure is, so that there is a set group of people that are going to convene to help distill and execute their leadership role, either in between meetings or however they're assigned, and take on.
Thank you, Michael. Damien, please.
I would just echo one of the points made by Helen that I think is going to be critical moving forward, and that's that distinction between staff and board, and not trying to set up any structures that could potentially get in the way of the CEO and the rest of the organization being able to move forward with their work. Additionally, having been on boards where there have been co-chairs, and not that I'm against it, I think that role clarity is critical, and even though there may be a sense that the work may be shared, sometimes that's why folks or organizations may go with a chair and a co-chair, or a chair and a vice chair, just so that that clarity exists. So I just think that if that's the direction we go, we'll need to make sure that that is penciled out in a way that makes sense, that allows the board to function efficiently and effectively.
Thank you, Damien. And we're about 12 minutes out from the end of this meeting. To presume to offer a little bit of shape to this and to stand corrected by any of you, it sounds like there's at least consensus around the concept of two co-chairs, noting Damien's emphasis on role clarity as between them, and that to act on that would not preclude you from, in the future, sort of building out the rest of the officer structure, mindful of Michael's comment that it's good to have a sort of holistic idea of the overall set of officers. I don't know if that leads any of you to make a motion about a structure for vice chairs.
I make a motion that we adopt the co-chair model, and one of the co-chairs must be somebody who has identified themselves as being a person who has lived experience with homelessness.
This is Helen. I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Motion is co-chair model, two co-chairs, one of whom would be a person who has lived experience of homelessness. Any discussion? I see no discussion. Jeannie, is this something you could call the roll for, please?
Yes. So again, I will call your names alphabetical order. Carrie Anderson is absent. Nate Kamenos.
Aye.
Paula Carvalho. John Chelmanak.
Aye.
Helen Howell.
Aye.
Gordon McHenry Jr.
Aye.
Harold Odom.
Aye.
Damien Patnod.
Aye.
Adrian Quinn.
Yes.
Michael Ramos.
Aye.
Sarah Rankin.
Yes.
Simha Reddy.
Aye.
And Juanita Spotted Elk is absent. So we have 11 ayes, no nays, no abstentions, and 2 absences.
Thank you, Jeannie. So we have a structure for 2 co-chairs. And I don't know if it, Paula, might confirm, is the way that you pronounce your last name Carvalho?
It's Carvalho.
Carvalho, okay. And then Nate, the way you pronounce your last name is Caminos?
Yes, Caminos, like El Camino, the car with an S, I usually say.
Excellent. Cool. And then, so I don't know if it is too ambitious in the next 9 minutes, but I think the other questions is at least the agenda contemplates is populating these officer roles. So I don't know if there is any discussion that you would all would like to engage in now about either nominations or a process to seek those nominations from amongst yourselves.
So this is John. I have just a quick question. of who qualifies under having had lived experience, because I believe that Harold and Juanita, I don't have my cheat sheet in front of me. Harold and Juanita were nominated by the coalition, and I believe Sarah was nominated by the coalition. But I just remember at least a couple, maybe one or two people mentioning that in their lifetime, they also have had lived experience with homelessness. So that's kind of the of board members who were not among those who were appointed. I'm just curious.
You are correct, John, that there are three members of the board who are here by virtue of having been appointed by the COC board after nomination from the coalition, our Lived Experience Coalition. Nothing in the motion that you all just voted on, you specified having had lived experience as you just construed it, and I am not able to sort of categorically identify who does have lived experience of homelessness and who does not.
Paula?
Oh, I was just saying I do, but I am not a member of the LEC.
And with 7 minutes left, I think perhaps maybe the discussion here, if I can presume to facilitate it a little bit, is maybe what is the process by which you all would like to, I don't think you're going to pick this in 7 minutes. And so what is, do you have any ideas of a process? Would you like to identify yourselves to your peers and plan to have a vote at the beginning of the next meeting? Would you like us to ask who is interested in the roles and then present that back to the group? I think there are many different ways to do this, and many of you have been on boards who have handled this awkward moment in graceful ways, I'm sure. So if any of you have a thought or a recommendation that the board might cohere around, we would love to hear that.
I think it would be important to know who is interested in serving as a co-chair. I'm agnostic as to how we get that information, if it's something that we ask people to reflect on and collect after this meeting, or if we ask people to notify Jeannie directly, or however we do that. But I don't think there's any point in discussing folks who are not interested in serving as co-chair.
Does anyone, that sounds like the right path, or somebody have a different path that they'd like to present?
I think that's a great path.
All right.
We have a couple people who are unfortunately unable to join us here today too. And I know in our meeting back in August, there are some initial discussions of, and even some nominations that were discussed, and it's been a few months now for all of us. But yeah, whether folks are even open to not be shy to say something now before we close, or even afterwards in some form with staff or each of us directly, and I think that's a good path to move forward.
What I can humbly propose as staff to you is that we will take your direction, which is to reach out and offer every member of the board an opportunity to identify themselves as interested in serving as a co-chair. We will ask the question whether they would be interested in serving as a co-chair, specifically because our co-chair who specifically has lived experience of homelessness. Nothing precludes two co-chairs from having lived experience of homelessness that I heard in your structure. And I think if you're comfortable with us reaching out to each of you, and to Nate's point, your colleagues who are not here, and then we could, before the next meeting, identify to you a list of persons who have sort of offered themselves as being willing to serve in these roles. Excellent. So I don't think that requires a formal board action. We will just take the homework away from you as your staff, and then get that accomplished before the next meeting. I believe the last item on our agenda is a little bit of a closeout, and I think Jeannie has that.
Yeah, so as a reminder to you all, our regular monthly meeting time is the second Tuesday of the month from 2 to 3:30, and it just so happens that in November, for our second month of meeting at a regular time, that falls on Veterans Day. So we did a doodle poll, and it looks like the date and time that most of you can attend would be on Tuesday, the 10th of November from 4 to 5:30 p.m. So we will get that meeting calendar request out to you either today or tomorrow. And then I noted down beyond the items that you voted on 2 action items, and just clearly we did not read these out after the last meeting, and one of them got forgotten. So I'm seeing the value in actually saying them out loud. So one is to follow up with you all about who and how to do outreach to in some sort of partnership with staff from the city and the county and a rotating implementation board member. And the second one is that we're going to reach out to you to ask who might be interested in serving as one of the 2 co-chairs. And we will do that. I will also note we did take some notes last time. We are recording all these meetings and posting the recordings on the website. Last time I documented the roll and the votes, and I can see that I neglected to send that to you in the follow-up email, and it also got missed for posting on the website. So we'll have some process improvement work to do there, but we are taking some minimal notes of these meetings to document who was there and some decisions that were made. And I made a note today to add the action items as well. So it just helps us keep track of what we need to follow up with between meetings. Was there anything I missed on action items? That would be the other quality check to do right now.
It's Gordon.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a direct action item, but I'll be very quick. We got an update on the advisory committee process or appointed process, and I just was reflecting. Nate talked about geographic diversity. We've affirmed the importance of lived experience in all aspects of this new, at least our roles around the implementation board. And so I just hope that as that advisory committee process moves forward, we bring that same sense of intentionality, diversity in terms of geography, diversity of experience, lived experience, new players, not the usual folks, recognizing that this is intended to be a step forward, a big step forward from where we have been and where we currently are. So just input, and appreciate the opportunity to make that, to encourage that to the folks who have the responsibility and accountability to help us get there. Thanks.
Thanks, Gordon. And I also just want to remind everybody that tomorrow you have a joint meeting with the governing committee from 10 a.m. to 12 noon. You should have received a Zoom panelist invite from Sarah Dickmeyer, who works with us here at the county. If for some reason you didn't, please follow up with us so we can make sure that it gets to you. And I know there's a couple people. I know, Sarah, it's during your teaching time, and I know Pastor Anderson cannot make it to that meeting, but hopefully we'll see the rest of you there tomorrow. And I think that concludes for today. Spot on at 3:30. That's a win. Have a good afternoon, everybody.